Before we get started, just a little introduction of the man himself. Edgar Allan Poe, the man, the myth, the guy who probably stared out rainy windows a lot. Born in Boston as the second child of David and Elizabeth Eliza Poe, both actors because clearly the drama gene ran deep, Poe's life took a tragic turn early. In 1810, his father pieced out on the family and his mother died the following year. Cue John and Frances Allen of Richmond, Virginia, who took Poe in but never formally adopted him. Think roommate with parental responsibilities. Poe attended the University of Virginia but dropped out after a year due to money troubles, though let's be honest, gambling debts didn't help. He and John Allen often clashed, mostly over Poe's tendency to turn tuition money into poker chips. In 1827, Poe enlisted in the army under the alias Edgar A. Perry, because apparently Edgar Allan Poe wasn't dramatic enough, and while serving, published his first collection, Tamerlane and Other Poems, signed by, wait for it, a Bostonian. Mysterious? Check. After the death of Frances Allen in 1829, Poe and John Allen called a temporary truce. It didn't last. Poe flunked out of West Point and finally declared his life's goal, full-time brooding poet. He then pivoted to prose, because starving artist vibes were trending, working for various literary journals across Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York City. His scathing literary criticism made him equally famous and unpopular, a very on-brand mix. In 1836, at 27 years old, Poe married his 13-year-old cousin Virginia Clem. Yes, 13, a detail that'll always raise eyebrows and Google searches. Virginia tragically died of tuberculosis in 1847, and Poe's grief deepened, setting him further on a path of melancholy and macabre. Then came 1845, when Poe published The Raven, the poem that rocketed him to literary stardom and made ravens everywhere proud. Poe had big plans for his own journal, The Pen, later renamed The Stylus, but those plans were cut short. In 1849, at age 40, Poe was found in Baltimore under mysterious circumstances, like full-on "what happened to this guy" levels of mystery. His cause of death remains unknown, with theories ranging from disease and alcoholism to substance abuse and even taking his own life. Basically, it's still the world's spookiest unsolved case. Despite his short and tumultuous life, Poe's influence on literature is massive, shaping everything from gothic horror to detective fiction. He even dabbled in cryptography and cosmology because apparently he was spooky and smart. Today, Poe's ghost, figuratively, or is it, haunts popular culture and music, movies, television, art, you name it. His former homes are now museums, and every year the Mystery Writers of America honor him with the Edgar Award, proving that, while Poe may have left us, his legacy of gloom, doom, and his genius lives on. And I know what you're saying, does this story belong on Screamville? And why? Yes, it does. From the mysterious way he dies to his ghost being spotted all over, it definitely has a home on this channel. So, if you're ready, let's break his life down detail to detail. Let's do it. Welcome to Screamville. Edgar Poe was born in Boston, Massachusetts, because what better city to launch the life of America's King of Gloom? Born to David Poe Jr., an American actor, and Elizabeth Arnold Hopkins Poe, an English-born actress, Edgar was destined for a life of drama from the get-go. He was the middle child, sandwiched between his older brother Henry and younger sister Rosalie, proving that middle child angst may be timeless. The Poe family's roots trace back to Ireland, where his grandfather, David Poe, emigrated from County Cavan around 1750. Turns out even the Irish couldn't resist the American dream, or nightmares in Edgar's case. Things took a tragic turn early. His father bailed in 1810, presumably ghosting the family before ghosting was cool. A year later, his mother passed away from pulmonary tuberculosis, leaving young Edgar an orphan at the tender age of 2. Enter John Allen, a wealthy Richmond merchant with a bizarrely diverse inventory: cloth, wheat, tombstones, tobacco, and unfortunately slaves. If you wanted it, Allen probably sold it. The Allens took Edgar in, gave him the fancy new name Edgar Allan Poe, and tried their hand at fostering. It wasn't official. They never formally adopted him, but he got the name and a roof over his head, which is about as close as you get to a 19th century upgrade. Little did they know, the boy they welcomed into their home would become the literary master of ravens, heartbreak, and existential dread. The Allen family, perhaps hedging their spiritual bets, had young Edgar Poe baptized into the Episcopal Church in 1812. John Allan, meanwhile, couldn't decide whether to play the role of doting dad or grumpy drill sergeant, so he did a little of both. In 1815, the family packed their bags and sailed to the United Kingdom, where young Poe dipped his toe into academics at a grammar school in Irvine, Scotland, his foster dad's old stomping grounds, before regrouping with the family in London in 1816. There, Poe attended a Chelsea boarding school until 1817 because apparently nothing says childhood fun like dusty classrooms and stern teachers. His next stop? Reverend John Bransby's Manor House School in Stoke Newington, a sleepy little suburb just far enough outside London to make you feel slightly lost. By 1820, the Allans hauled their luggage and Poe back to Richmond. 4 years later, teenage Edgar got to play dress-up as a lieutenant for the Richmond Youth Honor Guard during the city's pomp-filled celebration of the Marquis de Lafayette's visit. Then came 1825, when fortune quite literally knocked on John Allan's door. Allan's wealthy uncle, William Galt, passed away, leaving him a real estate windfall estimated at a jaw-dropping $750,000, roughly $20 million today. Hello, brick mansions and lavish lifestyle. Allan wasted no time flexing his newfound riches, promptly buying Moldavia, a swanky two-story house that screamed, "I've made it." Somewhere in this whirlwind, Poe reportedly got engaged to Sarah Elmira Royster. Ah, young love. But in February 1826, Edgar took his ambitions, and perhaps a stash of bad decisions, to the brand new University of Virginia. Founded by none other than Thomas Jefferson himself, the school came with a shiny new set of rules. No gambling, no drinking, no guns, no tobacco, no horses. So, naturally, everyone ignored them. Jefferson also implemented a progressive system of student self-governance, which pretty much let students do what they pleased, as long as they pretended to be responsible while the faculty wasn't looking. The University of Virginia's self-governance system was less of a scholarly utopia and more of a chaotic free-for-all, which may explain the high dropout rate. Poe, unsurprisingly, joined the ranks of the quitters. During his brief stint at college, he lost touch with his fiancée, Royster, and also managed to alienate his foster dad, John Allan, thanks to a growing stack of gambling debts. Poe blamed Allan for not giving him enough money to cover tuition, books, or even basic dorm furnishings, though Allan did send extra cash and clothes. Unfortunately, Poe's knack for accruing debt outpaced any financial assistance. After just 1 year, Poe threw in the towel on college life but didn't feel particularly welcome back in Richmond, especially after hearing that his sweetheart Royster had married some guy named Alexander Shelton. Heartbroken and broke, Poe headed to Boston in April 1827, scraping by with random clerk gigs and writing for newspapers. It was during this phase that he started signing his work under the oh-so-dramatic pseudonym Henri Le Rene. When poetry and odd jobs failed to pay the bills, Poe made a bold career pivot, the U.S. Army. On May 27, 1827, he enlisted as a private under the alias Edgar A. Perry, fudging his age to 22 when he was, in reality, a baby-faced 18. His first post was at Fort Independence in Boston Harbor, where he earned a whopping $5 a month. That same year, he published his first book, Tamerlane and Other Poems, anonymously attributed to a Bostonian. The world shrugged as only 50 copies were printed and even fewer were noticed. Poe's regiment later transferred to Fort Moultrie in Charleston, South Carolina, and he embarked on the brig Waltham in November 1827. His artillery skills earned him a promotion to artificer, a fancy term for the guy preparing artillery shells. With the new title came double the pay, a staggering $10 a month. Poe climbed the ranks quickly, becoming a sergeant major for artillery, the highest non-commissioned officer rank. But the military life was not for him, and he started plotting an early exit from his 5-year commitment. To make his escape, Poe came clean to his commanding officer, Lieutenant Howard, revealing his real name and circumstances. Howard, perhaps feeling sympathetic, promised to approve an honorable discharge if Poe could smooth things over with Allan. Poe wrote to Allan, who responded with the maturity of a brick wall, ignoring his pleas for months. To make matters worse, Allan neglected to inform Poe about his foster mother, Frances's declining health. She passed away on February 28, 1829, and Poe arrived a day too late, visiting only after her burial. Perhaps softened by grief, or maybe just tired of the drama, Allan agreed to support Poe's bid for a cadet appointment at West Point. And thus, Poe's journey took another dramatic turn, proving that even in the 19th century, life was a soap opera. Poe was finally discharged from the army on April 15, 1829, after finding someone to take over the thrilling gig of prepping artillery shells. With his military chapter behind him, he headed to Baltimore, where he moved in with his widowed aunt, Maria Clem, her daughter Virginia, Poe's first cousin, his brother Henry, and his ailing grandmother Elizabeth. It was a full house of family and dysfunction, a perfect setup for a future Gothic writer. That September, Poe got his first taste of validation when a prominent critic, John Neal, gave his poetry a glowing review, calling it not terrible. Thrilled, Poe dedicated a poem to Neal in his second book, Al-Araf, Tamerlane, and Minor Poems, published in Baltimore later that year. Finally, someone liked his stuff. In 1830, Poe enrolled as a cadet at West Point, but any hopes of bonding with his foster father, John Allan, were dashed when Allan remarried that October and managed to make their already toxic relationship worse. The two butted heads over Allan's love life, which included a couple of secret bonus kids from extramarital flings. Their feud reached new heights, and Allan disowned Poe entirely, cutting off any chance of reconciliation. Never one to linger where he wasn't wanted, Poe decided to get himself booted from West Point. And in true Poe fashion, he did it dramatically. He stopped going to formations, skipped classes, and even ghosted church. Predictably, this led to a court-martial on February 8, 1831, where Poe pleaded not guilty, because why not make it even more awkward, and got himself dismissed. Mission accomplished. After his exit, Poe traveled to New York and released a third poetry collection, modestly titled Poems. Financing came from his fellow cadets, who generously chipped in about $170, some giving as much as 75 cents, to help him publish. Maybe they thought they'd get more of the biting satire Poe had written about their commanding officers. Instead, they got high-minded works like Tamerlane and Al-Araf, plus a few gems like To Helen and The City in the Sea. Poe dedicated the book to his fellow cadets, possibly as a guilt offering for bailing on the military. By March 1831, Poe was back in Baltimore, living with his aunt, cousin, and brother. Sadly, his brother Henry, who had been battling illness and alcoholism, passed away on August 1, 1831. Life for Poe continued to be a turbulent mix of triumphs, tragedies, and one very crowded family house. After his brother's death, Poe tried desperately to make a living as a writer, but his efforts were about as successful as a wet match in a thunderstorm. However, he eventually managed to earn a living by his pen alone, becoming one of the first American authors to pull that off. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. His ambitions were stifled by the lack of an international copyright law. American publishers preferred to sell cheap, unauthorized copies of British works instead of paying for fresh content from homegrown talent like Poe. To make matters worse, the lukewarm reception of his work may have been partially due to the Panic of 1837. Nothing like a financial crisis to kill the vibe for new literature. While American periodicals were popping up like mushrooms during this time, thanks a lot new tech, many of them didn't last longer than a bowl of cereal left out overnight. Publishers were notorious for either refusing to pay writers or making them wait longer than promised, leaving Poe to beg for cash and assistance like a poet in a bad sitcom. After a few failed poetry attempts, Poe decided to give prose a try, possibly influenced by John Neal's critiques in the Yankee magazine, Talk About Tough Love. He got a few stories published in Philadelphia and even started working on his one and only play, Polition. In October 1833, the Baltimore Saturday Visitor awarded him a prize for his short story, Emma's Found in a Bottle, a tale that, for all its overlooked brilliance, did get him some attention, including from wealthy Baltimorean John P. Kennedy, who helped him place more stories and introduced him to Thomas W. White, the editor of the Southern Literary Messenger. In 1835, Poe became the assistant editor of the Southern Literary Messenger, but much like a reality TV contestant who doesn't play by the rules, White fired him within weeks, allegedly for showing up drunk. Poe then went back to Baltimore, where he managed to get a license to marry his cousin Virginia on September 22, 1835. How romantic. Except Virginia was only 13 and Poe was 26, so it's still unclear if they actually tied the knot at that time, but it was definitely an awkward situation all around. Poe was welcomed back to the Southern Literary Messenger after promising to behave like a responsible adult, something that apparently required a little bribery of good intentions. He returned to Richmond with Virginia and her mother ready to make things right. He stayed at the Messenger until January 1837, during which time he claimed the paper's circulation skyrocketed from 700 to 3,500. Because nothing says I'm doing my job like a good exaggerated success story. Poe published several poems, book reviews, critiques, essays, and articles, sprinkling in a few stories for good measure. On May 16, 1836, Poe and Virginia got officially hitched in a Presbyterian wedding ceremony performed by a mass of converts at their boarding house in Richmond. A witness, probably a little too eager to get the ceremony over with, falsely claimed Virginia was 21, despite her being just 13. Smooth, right? In 1838, Poe packed up and moved to Philadelphia, where he bounced around 4 different residences between 1838 and 1844. One of those residences at 532 North 7th Street has been preserved as a National Historic Landmark. Maybe they were trying to preserve the chaotic genius vibe he left behind. In the same year, Poe's one and only novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, was published and, naturally, widely reviewed. In the summer of 1839, Poe became the assistant editor of Burton's Gentleman's Magazine, where he cranked out articles, stories, and reviews that solidified his standing as one of America's top literary critics. That same year, Poe's collection, Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque, was published in 2 volumes, though the pay wasn't great and the reviews were, well, let's just say, mixed. We're being generous. But hey, at least he could say he tried, right? After leaving Burton's Gentleman's Magazine after a year, Poe found a gig at Graham's Magazine, a much more successful monthly publication. In the final issue of Graham's for 1841, Poe was part of a celebratory editorial note about the magazine's remarkable success, saying, "Perhaps the editors of no magazine, either in America or in Europe, ever sat down, at the close of a year, to contemplate the progress of their work with more satisfaction than we do now. Our success has been unexampled, almost incredible. We may assert without fear of contradiction that no periodical ever witnessed the same increase during so short a period." Talk about tooting your own horn. Someone was feeling real good about that success. Around this time, Poe tried to get cozy with the political scene, hoping to land a cushy government job under President John Tyler. He claimed to be a member of the Whig Party and set his sights on a position at the United States Custom House in Philadelphia, with some help from Tyler's son, Robert, who was an acquaintance of Poe's friend Frederick Thomas. But in classic Poe fashion, things didn't quite go according to plan. Poe flaked on a meeting with Thomas to discuss the job, claiming he was sick, though Thomas, in a rare moment of insight, thought Poe was probably just drunk. Spoiler alert, Poe never got the job, as all the positions were eventually filled by other people. Guess the Whig Party wasn't that into him after all. June 1840, Poe had big plans to launch his own literary journal, The Stylus, though it was originally going to be called The Pen, since it was going to be based in Philadelphia. Naturally, he took out a fancy ad for it in the June 6, 1840, issue of Philadelphia's Saturday Evening Post that read, "Prospectus of the Pen Magazine, a monthly literary journal to be edited and published in the city of Philadelphia by Edgar A. Poe." Catchy, right? Unfortunately, Poe's grand idea was tragically cut short before the journal could see the light of day. He died before it could even make a debut. Talk about bad timing. One chilly evening in January 1842, Virginia, while serenading Poe with her piano playing and singing, showed the first signs of consumption, aka tuberculosis, which Poe dramatically described as the breaking of a blood vessel in her throat. Classic Poe, always ready with a vivid, if slightly over-the-top diagnosis. Virginia's recovery was partial at best, and Poe, understandably stressed out, is said to have turned to heavy drinking to cope with the emotional turmoil. As if that wasn't enough to deal with, Poe decided to leave Graham's Magazine and start hunting for a new gig, once again eyeing a government post like a job-hunting desperado. But after some time spent spinning his wheels, he made the bold decision to head back to New York. There, he briefly worked at the Evening Mirror before becoming the editor and eventually the owner of the Broadway Journal. Poe, in typical Poe fashion, didn't exactly make friends in the literary community. He publicly accused Henry Wadsworth Longfellow of plagiarism, though Longfellow, probably rolling his eyes, never bothered to respond. Poe, ever the master of graceful backpedaling, later softened his accusations, claiming that writers often mix up their original thoughts with ideas they've absorbed from others. Because, everyone knows that writers are just a big, confused stew of borrowed ideas. Needless to say, Poe's contemporaries found this explanation as clear as mud and remained none too friendly toward him. Then, on January 29, 1845, Poe's poem *The Raven* appeared in the Evening Mirror, where it quickly became a sensation, making Poe a household name faster than a viral TikTok. Of course, at the time, he was paid a whopping $9, about $294 in today's money, for the privilege of having his name splashed across the paper. Oh, and in a fun twist, it was also published in the American Review, a Whig journal, under the delightful pseudonym Quarles. Because if you're going to make history, might as well do it under a cool fake name. Edgar Allan Poe, the name itself evokes chills. His literary creations were portals to the shadowy recesses of the human psyche. Poe's genius lay in his ability to make the supernatural feel terrifyingly real. The Raven introduced the world to the haunting refrain of Nevermore. The Fall of the House of Usher showcased his mastery of Gothic horror. The Telltale Heart explored guilt, paranoia, and the fine line between sanity and madness. This short story plunges the reader directly into the mind of a murderer. Poe's tales continue to haunt readers to this day. The Broadway Journal failed in 1846-63, and Poe then moved to a cottage in Fordham, New York, in the Bronx. That home, now known as the Edgar Allan Poe Cottage, was relocated in later years to a park near the southeast corner of the Grand Concourse and Kingsbridge Road. Nearby, Poe befriended the Jesuits at St. John's College, now Fordham University. Virginia died at the cottage on January 30th, 1847. Biographers and critics often suggest that Poe's frequent theme of the death of a beautiful woman stems from the repeated loss of women throughout his life, including his wife. However, as Poe was a prolific writer before Virginia's death, others have suggested that this explanation of his work is an oversimplification. Citation needed who? Poe was increasingly unstable after his wife's death. He attempted to court the poet Sarah Helen Whitman, who lived in Providence, Rhode Island. Their engagement failed, purportedly because of Poe's drinking and erratic behavior. There is also strong evidence that Whitman's mother intervened and did much to derail the relationship. Poe then returned to Richmond and resumed a relationship with his childhood sweetheart, Sarah Elmira Royster. On October 3, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe was discovered in Baltimore in what can only be described as peak distress mode, semi-conscious, disheveled, and, according to the Good Samaritan Joseph W. Walker, in need of immediate assistance. Poe was rushed to Washington Medical College, where he unfortunately expired just 4 days later on October 7, 1849, at precisely 5 a.m. Talk about an unholy hour to check out. Now, what exactly happened to Poe? Good question, because even Poe himself wasn't coherent enough to spill the tea. He was found wearing someone else's clothes, a questionable fashion choice at best, and allegedly spent his last conscious hours muttering the name Reynolds on repeat, like a broken record. Who was Reynolds? A friend? An enemy? A guy who owed him $5? We'll never know. His final words, however, were particularly on brand. Lord help my poor soul. Same, Poe, same. As if this story weren't mysterious enough, all the medical records, including his death certificate, have vanished into the ether. Convenient. At the time, newspapers claimed Poe died of congestion of the brain or cerebral inflammation, which were basically the 19th century way of saying, don't ask too many questions, it's probably alcohol-related. But was it really? Theories about Poe's untimely demise include everything from heart disease and rabies to carbon monoxide poisoning, syphilis, and even cholera, because why not? One particularly wild idea from 1872 suggests Poe was a victim of cooping, a 19th century election scam where unsuspecting citizens were kidnapped, forced to vote repeatedly for the same candidate, and then dumped like yesterday's garbage, as if politics weren't messy enough already. In true Poe fashion, his death remains one of life's greatest unsolved mysteries, a chilling plot twist worthy of the man himself. Over the decades, numerous theories have emerged to explain Edgar Allan Poe's untimely death, each as intriguing and inconclusive as the last. Alcohol poisoning, a common culprit in those days, was immediately suspected, given Poe's well-documented struggles with alcohol. However, some witnesses claimed he was not drinking in the days leading up to his collapse, casting doubt on this theory. Other theories focused on Poe's mental state. Some suggested he died by taking his own life, driven to despair by years of personal tragedy and professional setbacks. Others proposed he suffered a mental breakdown, his grip on reality finally shattered by the weight of his own dark imagination. More sinister possibilities also emerged. Some whispered of foul play, suggesting Poe was murdered, perhaps poisoned by a literary rival or robbed and left for dead. Cooping, a practice where unsuspecting victims were drugged and forced to vote multiple times in elections, was another theory, given that Poe was found during a period of intense political activity. Medical explanations ranged from rabies to diabetes to brain tumors. However, without access to modern medical records or the ability to exhume Poe's body, these theories remain speculative at best. Virginia, with its rich history and Gothic allure, holds a special place in the macabre legacy of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe spent much of his youth here, found love, and experienced profound loss. The Poe Museum in Richmond stands as a testament to the author's life and work. Whispers of Poe's restless spirit abound. Visitors report unexplained cold spots and fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure. And Richmond isn't the only Virginia city claiming a connection to Poe. Fort Monroe played a pivotal role in Poe's early adulthood. Poe served in the United States Army under the name Edgar A. Perry. Tales of Poe's ghostly presence persist, with sightings of a solitary figure. Baltimore, Maryland, steeped in Poe's legacy, holds a strong claim to his ghostly presence. Poe spent his final days here, and his spirit seems most restless. The Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum stands as a somber reminder of the author's struggles. Westminster Hall and Burying Ground, Poe's final resting place, is well known for his alleged haunts. Visitors leave trinkets at Poe's grave, hoping to appease his restless spirit. The Horse You Came In on Saloon, one of the last places Poe was seen alive, is rumored to be haunted by his ghost. Poe's restless spirit seems not to be confined to the cities where he lived and worked. Tales of his ghostly presence have surfaced in other parts of the country, each adding a new layer to the mystery surrounding his enduring legacy. The University of Virginia, in Charlottesville, Virginia, where Poe briefly studied, is said to be haunted by his specter. Students have whispered tales of a shadowy figure resembling Poe wandering the lawn, the university's historic central green, his face etched with a familiar melancholic expression. Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, a place that inspired Poe's short story The Gold Bug, is another location claiming a connection to his ghostly presence. Locals and visitors alike have reported sightings of a lone figure wandering the beach, his eyes fixed on the sand, as if searching for something lost or buried long ago. And in Providence, Rhode Island, the Providence Athenaeum, a library Poe frequented during his courtship of poet Sarah Helen Whitman, is said to be haunted by his bookish apparition. Visitors have described feeling a presence in the stacks, a sense of being watched, and even catching glimpses of a man in dark period clothing, his face illuminated by the warm glow of a nearby lamp, seemingly engrossed in a book. In 1875, Poe's remains were moved from his original burial site to a more prominent location in the same cemetery, Westminster Hall and Burying Ground in Baltimore, Maryland, where a larger monument was erected. During the move, it was discovered that his coffin had deteriorated significantly, but his body was not examined. So, after diving into all the theories surrounding Edgar Allan Poe's mysterious death, one thing is clear. The truth is as elusive as one of Poe's own twisted plot twists. Was it alcohol poisoning, rabies, a brain tumor? We may never know for sure, and maybe that's exactly how Poe would have wanted it. After all, the man practically invented the modern mystery story. Why not let his death remain one? Theories aside, what really matters is that Poe left behind a legacy that continues to haunt literature, pop culture, and anyone who's ever spent too long staring into the abyss of a raven's cold, judgmental eyes. Nevermore hits differently when you realize Poe probably didn't get a chance to say goodbye or explain what happened. Talk about the ultimate cliffhanger ending. But now I turn the mystery over to you. What do you think happened to Edgar Allan Poe? Was he taken down by something sinister? Or was it just the result of a lifetime of struggles catching up with him? Drop your theories in the comments below, whether they're as wild as a Poe story or as grounded as a detective novel. Bonus points if you make it rhyme. Poe would approve. And remember, if you're ever wandering through Baltimore, don't get too close to any shadowy figures in graveyards. You never know who might be lurking, or what secrets they're keeping. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully alive and not trapped under floorboards. Take care, mystery fans.